In the kingdom of Ibuka, the people lived in peace and harmony, their lands fertile and prosperous, their homes brimming with abundance. But this prosperity came at a price. Once every year, during the night of the full moon, a sacrifice had to be made to the gods that protected them. The sacrifice was a human life, a life given to the creature that dwelled in the dark forests surrounding the kingdom. In exchange, the kingdom thrived. Each year, as the full moon approached, black crows would appear, circling above the village and then perching on a single house. The house upon which the crows perched was marked by the gods, a sign that someone from that household would be sacrificed. The rules were clear. The family of the chosen house had to volunteer one of their own. No servants, no strangers, only blood from the household. Once the sacrifice was chosen, they would be bound to a wooden post outside their home on the night of the full moon. When darkness fell and the moon hung high in the sky, the creature would emerge from the forest, unseen by human eyes, and take the chosen sacrifice. By dawn, the creature and the offering would be gone, and the kingdom would be safe for another year. For years, this ritual continued. The villagers grieved but accepted their fate, knowing that the gods demanded a price for their prosperity. And always at the center of these sacrifices was their king, King Okeke, a strict and righteous ruler who upheld the rules without question. He would stand before the villagers as the sacrifices were made, his voice firm as he enforced the kingdom's laws. But one year, everything changed. As the full moon approached, the kingdom waited with bated breath for the arrival of the crows. Whispers spread through the village as people wondered who would be marked this year. The days passed, and soon enough the black crows came, circling above the village as they always did. But this time, the crows perched on a house that had never been chosen before, the house of the king. Shock rippled through the kingdom. The crows had never marked the king's household. For years, King Okeke had commanded the rituals, enforcing the rules of sacrifice without hesitation. Now the gods had chosen his family. The villagers gathered in the square, murmuring among themselves. Many were surprised, but some were quietly pleased. For years, they had watched their loved ones sacrificed, while the king's household remained untouched. Now, it was his turn. Finally, one villager whispered, "The king will know what we've suffered. Let's see if he follows his own rules." Another muttered. King Okeke stood before the people, his expression calm though his eyes flickered with unease. He raised his hand to silence the crowd. "The gods have made their will clear," he declared. "My family has been chosen, just as others before us have been. I will decide who among us will be sacrificed, and we will honor the gods as we always have." There was a murmur of approval from the crowd, but behind closed doors, the king's confidence wavered. That evening, King Okeke gathered his family in the grand hall of the palace. His wife, Queen Ijoma, sat beside him, her face pale with worry. His children, 2 sons and a daughter, stood before him, their expressions a mix of fear and confusion. "Father, what are we going to do?" His eldest son, Chidi, asked. "We can't let one of us be taken." King Okeke nodded gravely, his mind already working on a solution. "I will not allow this family to be torn apart," he said. "The people expect us to sacrifice one of our own, but I have a plan. We will make it seem as though the creature has taken someone from our household, without losing any of you." Queen Ijoma looked at her husband, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" The king stood and began to pace. "We will create a dummy," he explained. "We will fill it with hay and heavy stones, and we will cover it in blood. On the night of the full moon, we will tie the dummy to the post outside, and the creature will take it, believing it to be one of us." His youngest daughter, Ada, trembled as she spoke. "But father, what if the creature realizes it's not real?" "It won't," the king assured her. "The creature has never questioned the sacrifice before. As long as it takes the dummy, we will be safe." Queen Ijoma frowned. "Are you sure this will work? What if the gods punish us for this deception?" King Okeke met her gaze, his voice firm. "We have no choice. I will not let this family be destroyed." Reluctantly, the family agreed to the plan. The king ordered his servants to create the dummy in secret, and as the full moon drew closer, tension gripped the palace. The night of the full moon arrived and the kingdom was eerily silent. The villagers stayed locked in their homes, fearful of the creature that would come to claim its sacrifice. In the palace, King Okeke and his family watched from the windows as the dummy, dressed in royal clothing and covered in blood, was tied to the post outside their door. The king's heart pounded in his chest as the moon rose high, casting an eerie glow over the kingdom. He watched the dummy, his breath shallow, waiting for the creature to appear. Hours passed, and then, just after midnight, a low growl echoed through the air. The wind picked up, and the trees at the edge of the forest swayed as something moved through the shadows. The creature had come. From the safety of the palace, the king and his family watched as the creature emerged from the forest. Its form was hidden in darkness, but the sound of its heavy breathing and the rustling of leaves told them it was close. The creature stopped in front of the post, sniffing the air, and then, without hesitation, it took the dummy in its powerful grasp and dragged it into the forest. The king exhaled a sigh of relief, sinking into his chair. "It worked," he whispered. "We are safe." Queen Ijoma, however, was not convinced. She glanced out the window, her hands trembling. "For now," she murmured. The next day, rumors began to spread through the village. Word had leaked that the king had not sacrificed anyone from his household. The villagers gathered in the square, angry and confused. "He tricked the gods," one villager shouted. "He used a dummy." "We've lost our loved ones every year," another villager cried. "And now he cheats the gods to save himself." King Okeke summoned the villagers to the palace, standing before them with his usual commanding presence. He raised his hand, silencing the angry crowd. "Yes," he said, "I tricked the creature, but nothing has happened, has it? The crops still grow, the sun still shines. The creature took what it believed was a sacrifice, and the kingdom remains as it always has." The villagers murmured among themselves, uncertain. "There is no need to worry," the king continued. "The gods will not punish us. The creature has been satisfied." For a time, it seemed the king was right. The days passed and everything seemed normal. The crops grew, the animals grazed, and the villagers began to believe that perhaps the king's deception had worked. But then things began to change. A few weeks after the full moon, the crops began to wither. Fields that had once been green and abundant turned brown and brittle. The villagers noticed that their livestock was growing sick. Cattle fell ill, their bodies weakening with strange diseases no one had ever seen. At first, the villagers thought it was simply a bad season, but as more animals died and the crops failed to grow, fear began to spread. One evening, Queen Ijoma confronted her husband. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. "This is because of you," she hissed. "You broke the rules, and now the gods are punishing us." King Okeke scowled, his voice rising in anger. "I did what I had to do to save my family. And now the entire kingdom is suffering because of your selfishness," she shouted. "The gods demand a sacrifice, and you refuse to give them what they wanted. Look around you. The land is dying." The king clenched his fists, turning away from her. "It will pass. This is temporary." He tried to convince himself as much as her. "The gods have no reason to punish us further. We gave them a sacrifice, didn't we? The land will recover." But Queen Ijoma wasn't satisfied. "You deceived the gods, Okeke," she said through gritted teeth. "They know, and they will make us all pay." The days dragged on and the sickness spread. Villagers began to fall ill with the same strange ailments that had ravaged the livestock. The once fertile kingdom had turned into a land of fear and despair. The people whispered of a curse, of the gods' wrath that loomed over them, waiting to strike harder. Then one night, before the next full moon, the village awoke to a sound that hadn't been heard in years. A low, guttural growl that echoed from the depths of the forest. The ground seemed to rumble, the trees swayed, and a sense of impending doom swept through the kingdom. The creature had returned, but this time it wasn't waiting for the full moon. Without warning, the creature began to strike, pulling villagers from their homes at random, no longer bound by the rituals. It swept through the kingdom like a plague, snatching people in the dead of night, leaving entire families devastated. The order of sacrifice that had maintained peace was shattered. The people panicked. Some tried to flee to nearby kingdoms, but they found no refuge. The neighboring kingdoms refused to accept them, fearing that the wrath of the gods would follow them wherever they went. Ibuka was now a cursed land, and its people were trapped within it. "The gods are angry," villagers shouted in the streets. "This is all because of the king. He broke the sacred ritual." The people's anger turned toward the palace, demanding answers. But the king remained silent, locked away in the safety of his fortress. Inside the palace, however, tensions reached a breaking point. Queen Ijoma's voice was sharp as she confronted her husband once more. "Look at what you've done, Okeke," she spat, pacing in their chambers. "You defied the gods, and now the creature is killing us all." The king, his once firm and commanding presence now shaken, glared at her. "I did what I had to. I wouldn't let them take one of you." "And now, how many have died?" The queen shot back. "The blood of the innocent is on your hands." The king's anger boiled over. "Enough," he roared. "You think I wanted this? You think I had a choice?" But Queen Ijoma wasn't done. "We must pay the price, Okeke," she said coldly. "The gods demand a life from your household. Until we give them what they're owed, this kingdom will continue to suffer." The king stared at her, his face twisted with rage and guilt. He knew she was right, but he couldn't bear to face the consequences of his actions. "I will not lose my family," he said quietly, but the resolve in his voice was fading. "You already have," Queen Ijoma whispered. With the kingdom in chaos, the people on the verge of revolt, and the creature striking at will, King Okeke realized he had to act. His power was slipping, and the blame was squarely on him. The people had lost faith in him, and they demanded a solution. His only chance of maintaining control was to restore the balance. But how? It was then that the king made a terrible decision. That night, under the pale light of the moon, King Okeke summoned his most loyal guards and ordered them to seize Queen Ijoma. She had become too much of a liability, blaming him constantly, and fueling the belief that the gods would only be appeased if a member of his household were sacrificed. As the guards dragged her from her chambers, Queen Ijoma fought back, her voice echoing through the palace. "Okeke, you coward! You can't escape this! You'll never be free!" But the king turned his back, refusing to meet her eyes. "This is the only way," he whispered to himself, though deep down he knew the guilt would never leave him. That night, just before the full moon, Queen Ijoma was bound to the wooden post, just as countless others had been before her. The once proud queen now stood as a sacrifice, her fate sealed by her own husband. As the full moon rose, the kingdom held its breath. The villagers stayed inside, terrified of what might happen next. But this time, they were not filled with the usual fear of the creature. They were filled with the hope that the sacrifice would finally end the suffering. From the palace windows, King Okeke watched as the creature emerged from the forest. It moved with purpose, heading straight for the queen. The king's heart pounded in his chest as the creature took her in its powerful grasp, dragging her into the darkness. It was done. The people awoke the next morning to find that the creature had vanished. For the first time in months, there was no sign of its presence, no growls in the night, no villagers taken. The land itself seemed to breathe easier. The withered crops began to show signs of life, and the sickness that had plagued the livestock slowly began to lift. After Queen Ijoma was sacrificed, the kingdom of Ibuka seemed to return to normal. The crops flourished once again, the livestock grew healthy, and the strange illnesses that plagued the villagers faded away. For years, the creature no longer came. The villagers began to believe that the curse had been lifted for good. Whispers spread through the village. "It's over," they said. "The gods are satisfied. We are safe now." Even King Okeke, though haunted by guilt, allowed himself to believe that peace had finally returned. But what they didn't know was that this peace was only an illusion. The creature's absence wasn't the end. It was only the calm before a far greater storm. Deep within the forest, something far more ancient and powerful stirred. The true wrath of the gods was yet to come, and when it came, it would be unlike anything they had ever faced. The village had survived the sacrifices, but they were not prepared for what would come next.